Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Right Time. My name is Bomani Jones. Thanks for listening on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We are presented by Progressive Insurance. You can send us a tweet at the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. That is at Bomani_Jones. All right, joining us here at the top of the hour comes the NBA for us here at ESPN, especially the NBA draft. His name is Chad Ford. Now, Chad, we're in a weird situation in this draft where Markelle Fultz has been presumed to be the number one pick for quite a while, but he played on a 9-win team on the West Coast, so a lot of people haven't seen him play. So how do we reconcile hearing that he's kind of a can't-miss prospect, but the Celtics said, no thanks, we'll take somebody else?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think the Celtics would tell you that they saw 4 prospects that they all had ranked in the same tier, which means they all thought that they had somewhat equal value as prospects, very different players, but equal value to the Celtics. And so for the Celtics, it felt like, look, if we can get another valuable chip, in this case the Lakers pick 2 through 5 or the Kings pick in 2019, that was worth dropping 2 spots in the draft when we know that there's 2 players on the board that we really like. And look, I look at it and I think Markelle Fultz is the best prospect in this draft. But I understand what Danny Ainge is saying as well. It's not like there's a LeBron James in this draft and then there's everybody else, right? These guys all have similar upsides and all have similar floors. In certain ways. And while Markelle Fultz has the least flaws of the group, he also doesn't have that extreme one thing that he does well that necessarily sets him apart the way the other top prospects do.
Well, I guess the next prospect that comes to mind for a lot of people is Lonzo Ball. We've heard so much about him at the number 2 pick. Is there anything about his game that worries you? Yeah,
a couple things. He's a terrible defender. That's one that I think is big. 2, while he's a good athlete, he's not an elite athlete, especially when it goes to lateral quickness. And you look at a lot of the point guards in the league today, he's going to have a hard time guarding them. And then 3rd, he was a very good shooter at UCLA, but he has a very funky shot. He has got a low release point. It's a slow release. And there's teams that worry that as he gets into the NBA, it's going to be harder for him to get that shot off. With that said, he has such elite court vision. I think he's the best passer we've seen in this draft in a decade.
All right, talking to Chad Ford of ESPN on the Right Time. Now, I was wondering with scouts, as we've seen teams that have put more of an emphasis on the three-point shot, has the way that teams look at those floor general types changed?
Absolutely. You don't necessarily, and I think this has worked against Lonzo Ball to a certain extent, you don't just need a guy who is a pass-first point guard anymore. You look at a lot of the elite point guards in the league, Russell Westbrook, MVP candidate, James Harden, MVP candidate, and they set up other people by scoring. That's what they do, and so when you look at a Markelle Fultz, for example, or a Dennis Smith, there's a precedent now for guards that are really hybrid guards, and I think it's a bigger point in the league today, which is that you hear more and more teams talking about positionless basketball. Right, they're less concerned about whether you're a point guard or a 2 guard or a 3 or what are you, than what sort of skills do you bring to the table that can help a team, and can you defend multiple positions? Can you do multiple things on the floor? And these one-dimensional players are giving way to players that can do lots of different things on the court.
All right, we're talking to Chad Ford of ESPN here on the Right Time. Now, we hear a lot about there being maybe 6 multiple-time All-Stars in this draft, but the funny part is you always hear about the 6. People very rarely break those guys out. So of those other guys outside of Ball and Fultz, which one of them really jumps out to you?
I love Josh Jackson. I think he's the best two-way player in this draft. I think he's the best defender. I think he can defend 3, maybe 4 positions on the floor. He plays with a Kevin Garnett-like intensity and competitiveness. He's got a funky jump shot. But he shot 37% from 3, which is actually pretty good, and shot over 40% from 3 in the second half of the season. It's still a work in progress. You watch it and you say it's ugly and it's inconsistent and he's got to keep working on it. But he's got just about everything else that you'd like in a basketball player. And there's been other players that have come to the league and have had to work on their form and on their jumper and have figured it out, Kawhi Leonard being one of those guys. So I think there's space for Josh Jackson to go, and he's such a dynamic athlete, and he's so versatile. He's exactly what you're talking about when you talk about a multi-position positional or positionless player. You can imagine him playing the 1, the 2, the 3, and even played the 4 at Kansas at times.
Now, are teams at all concerned about the incident that he had with a girlfriend of his and apparently him assaulting her car?
Absolutely. He's probably gotten more scrutiny than any player in this draft because of it, and you always try to get to the bottom of this. Was this a situational thing? Was this a lack of maturity? Was this an act of stupidity, or is there a pattern here? Is there something else going wrong? Is there an anger management issue? Is there a disrespect or disregard for women? Is there something else in his background that concerns you? And teams have dug deep, everything from hiring private investigators to go out and investigate the case themselves, to bringing in sports psychologists to talk with Josh Jackson to try to get to the bottom of this. I think the teams have walked away pretty satisfied that his reputation before he got to Kansas, which was he was a really stand-up guy and a high-character player, that these were more youthful, terrible mistakes that he made, as opposed to patterns that are going to continue to show up when he gets to the NBA.
All right, we're talking to Chad Ford of ESPN here on the Right Time. So now the Celtics are here at this number 3 pick. Where do you think they go?
I think they go Josh Jackson or Jason Tatum. I think they prefer Josh Jackson, but they have not gotten Josh Jackson in for a workout. And that's not as troubling to Boston as the fact that they haven't got to see his medical yet. That's the one that I think gives you pause as a general manager when you're drafting that high in the draft. Is there potentially something wrong with him that maybe his agent is hiding, that he's not allowing us to see? And if we draft a guy only to find out that there's a medical issue that could hurt us down the road, I think that's going to give them pause. I don't know that it'll stop them from drafting him at number 3, but certainly Jason Tatum's there if they decide not to, and he may be the best pure scorer in the draft.
All right, talking to Chad Ford of ESPN here on the Right Time. As much as we talk about the need for shooting and how that is improved, are you surprised that more teams don't have Malik Monk a bit higher?
Yeah, I am actually, because I think he's one of the 2 or 3 best shooters in this draft, and he's probably the most explosive backcourt scorer in this draft. He's the type of guy that can drop 30 points on you every night. He lacks size and he lacks length for his position, and that's been the big hang-up that NBA teams have had about him throughout this process. But man, is he an electric scorer, and he's an elite athlete as well. A great finisher at the rim. I think he's going to make a team really happy, even if he ends up being one of these electric Lou Williams-like 6 men off the bench. Those guys are very valuable in the league.
Now, is there any player that you see and you worry might slide in this draft lower than where we're projecting him?
Trying to figure out where Dennis Smith's going to fall right now. I think Dennis Smith's a top 5 talent in this draft, but he's having a hard time with how crowded the point guard situation is at the top, kind of finding that place that he lands. I think Dallas at 9 is a pretty good bet as a landing spot for him, but I don't think it's a lock that he's there. And if he slipped out of the top 10, that would be really, really interesting.
By the way, are there any big men here we're talking about? I feel like everybody we're talking about now is a perimeter player.
Yeah, it's not been a great draft for big men. Absolutely not. I think maybe the guy that you look at as a big man that's the best big man in this draft is Zach Collins out of Gonzaga, a guy that came off the bench and plays with a lot of energy, good rim protector, tough, does some things that are really interesting, but not necessarily a guy that's going to be a superstar in the league. This is a draft about point guards, not about big men.
All right, talking to Chad Ford of ESPN here on the Right Time. Now, is there any player you feel like is getting a little bit more coverage than he should based on his skill?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Luke Kennard is a guy that I think, to me has been a prospect that I like a lot, and he's one of the 2 or 3 best shooters in the draft, and I see the premium there, but I'm not sure that he's a top 10 pick like some teams are talking about. And Justin Jackson out of North Carolina, also a good shooter, but a guy that was a very inconsistent shooter until his junior season, not a great athlete. Both of those guys, I think maybe teams are erring a little bit too much on the side of being good shooters, and I think that they don't bring enough else to the table, perhaps, to justify where they're picking. I like Luke Kennard better than Justin Jackson, and I definitely think that he's worthy of a lottery pick. But when teams start talking about him at 6, 7, and 8, I think that might be a little too high.
All right, that is Chad Ford, covers the NBA draft for us here at ESPN. Thanks so much, sir. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, now, nothing makes a summer birthday or anniversary more magical than 1-800-Flowers.com. Right now, when you order a dozen multicolored roses for only $29.99, you'll get another dozen plus a vase absolutely free. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Right Time. My name is Bomani Jones. Thanks for listening on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We are presented by Progressive Insurance. Thanks to Chad Ford of ESPN for joining us last segment. Brian Windhorst of ESPN will join us in the 6 o'clock Eastern hour, next segment rather. Talk about what's going on with the Cavs. Brian Windhorst will join us at 6:30 Eastern. That's the old soul song of the day, Survival of the Fittest by Mobb Deep. Them drums. Ba-doom, ba-doom. That was always what got me about that. So we lost Prodigy today. Rest in peace at age 42 to Prodigy. The thing about Prodigy is, for all you youngsters listening to rap music, man, you don't need all these tricks to be a dope rapper. Be clear, be strong, be evocative, because it ain't like Prodigy was giving you any, like, tricks in this. Ain't no double time and nothing this. You just felt it, right? Also love about Mobb Deep, art school gangsters, right? Like, they made art school gangster rap, where basically they took all the training from art school and was like, yeah. But we still gonna make this grimy just with great technical specificity. 888-729-3776. That's our telephone number. Woj we got news according to The Vertical. Adrian Wojnarowski. The Lakers are trading Timothy Mozgov and D'Angelo Russell to the Nets for Brook Lopez and the 27th pick in Thursday's draft. Now, we heard that the Lakers are trying to get themselves another pick. I figured they want to get one better than 27. But D'Angelo Russell, it's been real. Whole lot of stuff I said earlier in the show. If you were listening on the podcast, I hope you listen to this segment too. Because, yeah, D'Angelo Russell is up out of there. Important note, Brook Lopez's contract is up at the end of 2018. I mean, I don't know about you, Shannon, but that sounds like cap space in case you wanted to sign, I don't know, LeBron James.
Sounds like a plan.
It could work or however. Hey, man, like there's that. The move has been made. Lopez, I think, is an interesting guy to get, even if you wanted to keep him, because did you know what Brook Lopez started doing last year while, the Nets were losing and none of us were watching? Shooting threes. How many threes a game do you think Brook Lopez shot last season? Just guess.
3.
5. Right. Brook Lopez is like, yo, I'm trying to stick around.
The more threes I shoot, the less rebounds they expect.
That's right. He's out here shooting these threes, but what he is he's a 5 who can spread the floor. Now, he's a poor rebounder and not a very good defender, but he is a 5 that can spread the floor. And this also tells me Magic did not come in here to continue some extended rebuilding plan. No. Magic's like, yo, we got to turn the quarter, man. People ain't used to the Lakers being sorry. L.A. needs us, baby. L.A. needs us. And they decided that D'Angelo Russell was a bit extra because, as I said earlier in the show, if you were going to draft a point guard, then you didn't need D'Angelo Russell. And so they put a stamp on D'Angelo Russell, stuffed him in the mailbox, sent him up out of town. Here's the question, though. If they were looking to trade for Paul George, I mean, wouldn't it help to have D'Angelo Russell? Right? Like, the Pacers are probably going to lose Jeff Teague in free agency. He's going to probably get too much money. A nice young point guard who's kind of local. He's from Louisville. That ain't too far from around there, right? So what do the Lakers have to trade to get Paul George if they don't have him? What, Julius Randle, so that the Pacers can have the privilege of paying Julius Randle $70 million over 4 or 5 years? Like, is that what it is? Like, I mean, I'm being serious. Like, what move do you make now if you're the Lakers? Because I think Russell was probably the best chip they had if they weren't going to give up the number 2 pick.
So with them trading Russell now, does this mean that the Lakers are now going to stand pat and just wait to sign Paul George now?
That's why I now have no idea. I came into this show feeling like the Lakers are probably going to make this trade before the draft. Like, I mean, I felt like they were going to be able to make the move. If this is table setting for the move, I don't know. The Lakers have, 3 first-round picks? Because they got the 2, I believe they had another one, and now they've got this. Maybe that's what it is. Like, maybe they find some way to package this and turn that into Paul George. But I don't feel like the number 27 pick is having you get that much closer to getting a player of that caliber. So what in the world is going on here? Oh, the Lakers also have 30 million, 30 million cap space. I looked down and it says Lakers also have 30. We were just talking about picks. Okay, they got 30 mil. By the way, what are the Nets doing taking that Mozgov contract that all of us thought was bad for the Lakers to sign themselves? And now okay. Is there any possibility that it's the owner doing a solid for the homie from the motherland? Not the motherland, but they motherland. It's possible that that's what's going on here. Could it be? Could it be? I got nothing there. I got nothing. But here we are with the Lakers.
Well, if you're Nets, though, this is a great trade for the Nets, though, because you get a young player in D'Angelo Russell. You don't have a draft pick this year. You don't, or a first-round pick this year. You don't have your first round next year. At least it gives you a young centerpiece to at least start the rebuilding process behind.
Well, here's what also I think it gives them. Like, I still think there's a good possibility that D'Angelo Russell could be really good, right? Like, when they were the draft that he was in after Towns, he was my no-brainer number 2 pick. I was like, you take him over Okafor, over Porzingis, all those guys. Russell was the guy that I would have gone with in that. Now, what we've seen in L.A. is that people have said that he's not the most mature young man in the world. Nick Young, I suppose, would be in agreement on the fact that he's not the most mature young man in the world. But people felt like he needed to grow up. Byron Scott, certainly felt like he needed to grow up. But I feel like there's still a great level of room for improvement with him, where if he does come close to being as good as I think that he could be, you put him in New York, right? Now, granted, it's the Nets, but it's in New York nonetheless. Like, if they've got themselves a young star in New York City, I think that's something that the Nets need, like separate from what they need in terms of becoming a better basketball team. I do think that's something that the Nets need. All right, 888-729-3776. Hit the phone. Talk to Stacey in Brooklyn. Stacey, what's going on?
What up, Bo? What's up, Shannon?
Yo.
Man, I've said my prayers, man. I've been on my knees, Bo. But, man, please, can the divine God's rescue us from this purgatory, man, that's called Nick fandom, man. Please let De'Aaron Fox and Isaacs fall to us in the 8th, man. Please. I'm on my knees, man.
That's why y'all wanted me to ask Chad Ford about this Isaacs guy, because he's supposed to go to the Knicks.
No, I saw the Isaacs kid play quite a few times, man. Make some errors sporadically from time to time, but the kid has got a nice game, and he got size, man. He can run the floor. He can run the floor pretty good. Hey, I wouldn't be disappointed if we picked him up, man. And you know what? If we could even snatch up Malik Monk late in the draft or whatever, man, that'd be even, hey, I'm all for it, man. I'm all for it.
Stacey, you think you'll get Malik Monk late in the draft?
Not late. I think he's going to go in the top 10, but I would definitely take him, man, if he falls to it. I mean, he's looking at a reliable starter for the next 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. Can light it up. He can get hot, man. He can get hot at times. Kind of like reminds me of a poor man's Vinny Johnson, if you will.
Stacey, you're going full Knicks fan on us right now. You know that, right?
I'm hurting, man. I gotta be optimistic, man. We talking about this at the end of June, man. I gotta have some kind of optimism, man. Jimmy Butler, when you mentioned him earlier, man, about him being an alpha and everything, I think he's kind of one of those guys that could take on a secondary role. But you know what? One thing I know about it, man, being an alpha myself, once you get to that level of like where you're the man, it's kind of hard to relinquish that, man. And looking where he's at now, plus to come to a city like Cleveland, he may be looking down the road. I mean, maybe not, but he may be looking down the road and saying to himself, hey, this crew might not be here next year, man, so why stick around and why put myself in that situation? You know what I'm saying?
Nah, you on to something there. But, hey, Stacey, man, we got to go into this break. I'm going to holler at you soon.
Man, I want to finish up. All right, then.
Oh, no, go ahead and finish. You got 20 seconds.
Hey, man, all right. Hey, I just want you to know, man, we dancing to Candy at the wedding reception, so get your dancing shoes on. Get your steps. You got 3 months to get Arthur Murray or some Fred Astaire steps. And tell my man Mike and Hitman in Chicago, man, hey, you don't have to have skills like Fred Astaire. You got to have words like my man Shakespeare. Peace. One love, baby.
Take it easy, Stacey. 888-729-3776. That's our telephone number. Coming up next, how close are the Cavs to add one more piece? We'll talk to Brian Windhorst of ESPN about that on ESPN Radio, the ESPN app, Sirius XM Channel 80.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
And gentlemen, welcome back to The Right Time. My name is Bomani Jones. Thanks for listening on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Welcome back to The Right Time with Bomani Jones here. We're going to be joined by Brian Windhorst, our insider at ESPN, here very shortly.
I'm good. Something got caught down my throat. Sorry about that, Brian. In the meantime, how do the Cavs not have a general manager right now?
Well, some would argue that Dan Gilbert is operating as a general manager, so everything's A-OK. What's the problem?
Yeah, but I mean, this is the interesting thing that all this stuff is going on, and we're hearing about the Cavs maybe trying to get Jimmy Butler, maybe trying to get Paul George, and David Griffin is no longer the general manager. So how do we get to this point?
Yeah, it's a strange situation. I got to tell you, I've been in the league 15 years, covering the league. I've never seen anything like it. It's not something that I think you'll see again for another 15 years, because this was a slow-moving collision. We very easily could see that this was coming, that David Griffin didn't have a contract, and as the months rolled on, you were like, how long is this going to go? And the answer was it went until yesterday. And look, whenever you have a split, you're going to have two different sides to the story, and both guys have their sides. But at the end of the day, David Griffin felt like he had earned a contract that put him at least near the top with his peers. Both in title and, frankly, in monetary compensation. And Dan Gilbert, he just doesn't, historically doesn't value general managers. If he did, he wouldn't have had 4 in 10 years, or 12 years, I guess it is. And so what his willingness was to give him in terms of compensation and pay was a different thing altogether than what David Griffin was expecting. And all the other stuff, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, are side issues. They couldn't agree on the basic things of compensation and responsibility. And why it took until June 20th to happen, there's probably 100 different reasons, but at the end of the day, that's what happened.
How much will this affect their ability to make a move now, because with this chaos?
I don't think that it does. Ultimately, if it's going to be a move at the level of a Jimmy Butler or a Paul George, Dan Gilbert was going to be, neck and neck at the front of the line. They have the assets that they have. The negotiating is going to be, you'd like to have a more competent or a more experienced negotiator, but, Dan Gilbert's going to be at the front line anyway. And that's frankly the way I compared this a lot to what happened with Kevin Love. When that deal went down with Kevin Love, when they executed that trade, Dan Gilbert was on the front line of it. Dan Gilbert had a negotiation with Kevin Love person to person before the trade. I know that it looks bad. I agree. I know that it's complicated, but I honestly don't think whether the Cavs are able to get Paul George or not is not going to make a difference as to who the GM was.
All right, we are talking to Brian Windhorst of ESPN here on The Right Time. Now, if they were looking to make one of these big moves, we all presume that Kevin Love is the guy who would come in, but is anybody untouchable other than LeBron James?
I mean, I'll just say what David Griffin always said when he was sitting there is that nobody's untouchable. Now, LeBron has a no-trade clause, so I'm fairly certain he will not be traded. But under the right circumstances, I don't think anybody truly can be untouchable. But most likely the asset that they would look to have to move would be Kevin Love. I mean, ideally, you wouldn't have to do that. Ideally, you could keep your big three together. I mean, if you're chasing the Warriors, one of the most amazing things that the Warriors were able to do was to keep their 3 stars together and add another star. Ideally, that's what the Cavs would like to do. I just don't think that's realistic. They don't have draft picks. They don't have young assets. They don't even have salary cap space. So they're reliant on on using probably Kevin Love. And if really what it comes down to is, are you willing to gamble on a Paul George who's only going to be with you probably for 1 year? Would you be willing to trade Kevin Love, who's under contract for multiple years, to roll the dice for 1 year? And what I know about Dan Gilbert, the answer to that is probably yes. And so I know that they've been looking at some third team options. They were setting it up. They went out and shopped Kevin Love to see if they could get a lottery pick for him, because while Kevin Love is a really good player, a 20-10 guy, an all-star, if you're rebuilding, trading Paul George for Kevin Love doesn't make the most sense in the world. So you would probably need to attract the Pacers with the draft pick, and they were doing that. And I would think that if they were able to pull it off, it would be that type of trade.
Now, a lot of people feel, I wouldn't say certain, but somewhat confident that there's a chance LeBron James could leave at the end of the season to go to Los Angeles. How do the Cavs feel about this?
I think their eyes are wide open about it. Now, I also think that I know it's great for talk radio and TV, and I'm sure that this will be a topic for the next 12 months. But I can just tell you, having gone through this with LeBron several times in the past, you're just guessing. I don't mean you, Bomani. I mean just anybody's just guessing. We won't know what LeBron's feelings are going to be until 360-some days from today. I don't care what sources say in September or January or March. We're not going to know. And the Cavs are aware of that going in. The other thing is LeBron isn't looking to leave. I think he wants to be on a team that gives him a chance to win. And if the Cavs put together a team that gives him a chance to win, all things being equal, he'd like to stay at home. We'll just have to see if all things are equal in 12 months.
All right, we're talking to Brian Windhorst of ESPN here on The Right Time. Now, Chauncey Billups' name has come up as the guy to run basketball operations from the Cavs. Where did Dan Gilbert's affection from him start?
Way back when Chauncey was a Piston. He's one of the most adored Pistons of all time. Dan Gilbert is a devout Pistons fan. At least he was until he bought the Cavs. If he could have bought the Pistons, trust me, he would have. It would have been his preference. They weren't for sale back then. Dan's company, and everybody knows Dan runs Quicken Loans, but before it was Quicken Loans, his company in Detroit was called Rock Financial, and the face of Rock Financial was Chauncey Billups. He was the guy that Dan Gilbert, before he was an owner, paid to endorse his company. I've talked to Chauncey about the possibility of working for the Cavs. And while some of those conversations have to remain private, let's just say that yesterday wasn't the first day that he realized it might be a possibility, just as a lot of the league realized David Griffin might not be back with the Cavs, whether it was decided in May or June or later.
Well, is this job a lot to ask as someone who's not worked in a front office before?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Chauncey brings to the table is instantaneous respect from players. And when you look at LeBron, most of the coaches he's played for before Ty Lue were not players. And I know that playing for a coach, that had currency with him. Before that, it was Paul Silas, who was 40 years older than him. Most of the general managers he's worked under have not been former players. The exception was Pat Riley and Danny Ferry, but not really relate to him. LeBron played against Chauncey Billups, so he walks in with instantaneous credibility. Now, does that help you make a trade? Does that help you negotiate a contract? No, it does not. But there is something to be said to that. And also, I've talked with Chauncey. He studies the league very closely. I've spent a lot of time doing TV alongside him. He will not have the experience in doing deals, but it won't be because he doesn't know the league. He knows the league. He knows the rules. And my guess would be if he decides to go for this, he would hire somebody to be his general manager who is experienced to help him in those situations.
Well, I tell you, hearing you mention LeBron James and Paul Silas reminds me of the fact that you were the witness for maybe the greatest Paul Silas moment ever when he ran our renewable out of that locker room and called him a hip-hop MF. Oh, man.
I was like, is this how the NBA is?
Well, you learned a lesson right there. Don't mess with Paul Silas. That was Brian Windhorst of ESPN. Thanks so much, my man. The Right Time is brought to you by Pennzoil Synthetics. Taking synthetic motor oil performance to a whole new level. Make the switch to Pennzoil Synthetics today.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
888-729-3776 is our telephone number. All right, Shannon, what we miss out on today?
We know you can't be on top of all the news and information of the day. Now, if you haven't heard.
All right, the NBA offseason is heating up. Obviously, we have the draft here on Thursday. A lot of big names out there. Jimmy Butler, Paul George, they may or may not be traded. And if you haven't heard, here's Bomani Jones earlier today on The Right Time discussing why teams value assets so much.
We are fascinated with this idea of assets, right? Like, we love, that is the buzzword to use, is assets. We love talking about how teams stack up all these assets. So, like, we talked about the Sixers for the longest. The Sixers had all these assets, but the question was, when were you going to convert them into, like, an asset you could use? You know what I mean? Like, not all assets are the same, right? So they got all these assets. It's like, okay, cool, you got a brick of gold. Brick of gold is an asset. You can't walk in the store and buy nothing with a brick of gold, though, right? You got to turn it into cash at some point. At what point are you going to turn it into cash? You know what these assets sound like? Shannon, you ever have anybody when you were little buy you savings bonds?
I did, actually.
All right. Was your mom the one holding on to them savings bonds? Because here's the thing that would always happen. I go talk to my mom about, I got these savings bonds. Maybe we can sell those. No. We're going to keep those savings bonds. How many people ever actually cash in the savings bond? Right? Like, you always get the savings bond, and you just hold on to it. Why? Because it's an asset. Like, I got a couple savings bonds for somewhere. For all I know, they're worth $3 million, right? But you're always like, I got the savings bond. Well, hold on to that thing. It's going to be worth some money. But it ain't money right now, and I need money. right? Go take that $50 bond in there and give me some cash so they don't cut off these lights, right? A lot of teams, I feel like, are in this place where it's so romantic to talk about what the assets are. Yo, man, why don't you go turn it into the real deal? Like, Paul George isn't a what if. So, like, the Sixers had those assets, and then they turned them presumably into Markelle Fultz. Markelle Fultz is still a what if. Right? Like, we don't really know what this Markelle Fultz thing is going to be. We got a great idea of what this Paul George thing is going to be. So, yeah, Paul George ain't going to be enough to push the Lakers to the point of winning a championship. But if you got a chance to get Paul George, I feel like you put a stamp on that what if and say whatever.
Our Twitter poll today, which was on ESPN Radio's Twitter account, said, of these four players, which is most likely to move teams by the start of next season? And the choices were Paul George, Jimmy Butler, Kristaps Porzingis, or Kevin Love. 55% of the audience said Paul George. Of those four, more likely to be moved.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, though, it looks like three of them are going to get moved. Porzingis the least likely.
And I'd imagine that now Paul George to Lakers is going to be a little bit tougher with them trading D'Angelo Russell to the Nets.
There is that. But, I mean, it would not surprise me if somebody jumped on the Paul George wagon. Otherwise, it's going to be an awkward year in Indiana.
Really quickly, speaking of Kevin Love, though, we've seen reports that LeBron and Kyrie have reached out to Jimmy Butler and trying to court him and the whole nine. If you're Kevin Love, though, you got to be like, hey, hold on. It was all good just a week ago, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Think they're answering this call when Kevin Love calls LeBron and Kyrie?
Yeah, it's going to voicemail. I don't know if it's going straight, but it's going.
All righty, moving on to the PGA Tour, where they have announced that they're going to institute blood testing next year for HGH. Are you surprised by this?
No, I am not surprised by this. I mean, this has been like one of those whispers about like our guys on the tour using these things, but performance enhancing, I think, takes on a different level on that because you got to worry about like in like orchestras, for example, beta blockers. There's so much pressure on people. They're so uptight that the beta blockers to relax them. Those are the things I'm more curious about in golf than stuff like HGH.
Going back to the NBA, where it's believed that Dwayne Wade is leaning towards picking up his $24 million option with the Bulls. Good move for Wade.
What you think?
I mean, aside from the $24 million.
But ain't no aside.
I guess I should have worded it differently. Do you think Wade, if he opts in with Chicago, finishes next season with Chicago? It's a better question.
I mean, I think Chicago will try to find somebody to take him, but I don't know who that will be, right? Like, is this a good move for Wade? Wade's like, this is all it could be, bro. That's all it could be. $25 million. You know how much money I gave back to the Heat trying to make it work?
I mean, it's cold up here, but it ain't that cold. I mean, I can invest in a coat.
Come on
some
now.
Boots. All righty, last and certainly not least, we'll go out to Winfield, West Virginia, where police say a West Virginia man was found asleep in a stranger's home, and he has been charged with burglary. So apparently the gentleman's been cited on criminal complaint in Putnam County after the homeowner called dispatchers after finding his glass door broken and a man asleep in one of his spare bedrooms. What are you doing? It's one thing to break into a house. I get it. You can break whatever you want to do. Choose wisely. But then to go to sleep in a man's house?
Man, think about this, though. How hard on your luck do you have to be in a situation where you rob at a house and you still so tired that you're like, nah, I just need to lay down on this bed, bro. I just need to catch me 40 winks. 45 if they'll let me.
This gentleman, Stacey Foster, 39-year-old Stacey Foster, he's lucky to still be here, though.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I don't know how to get.
Yes.
I can imagine how to get down to West Virginia.
Yeah, if I say sleep or not in Texas, we know how that ends, right? We know how that ends. But, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on The Right Time. We do this every weekday, 4 p.m. Eastern. Shannon, Nuno, Steven, and Abby, thanks so much. Jayla and Jacoby are coming up next. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to The Right Time podcast. Please come back tomorrow for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.